Hello there, people of the internet. I think that we can all generally agree that Mauser rifles are very nice rifles. I don't think that there's any real debate in the firearms community that Mausers are actually pretty gosh darn good, especially for, what they are and how simple they are. Well, that being said, there's a lot of diversity with a lot of other rifles in the firearms community, especially old surplus rifles. And it seems that Mauser is one of those rifles that kind of has immunity to that topic because no matter who I talk to, the people who dislike this rifle or dislike that rifle or have preferences over one thing or the other, they can all generally agree that the Mausers are actually quite nice. However, I have heard a lot of negative things said about this series of rifle right here. This right here is a Carcano. The Carcano series of rifle is just like every other series of rifle that was being made during the time period that this was designed. Typically, those rifles hold anywhere from 5 to 10 rounds. Some rifles at that time period held 3, some held 8, unusual numbers. But anyway, bolt-action rifle, manually operated, and it was chambered in some sort of newfangled smokeless cartridge. Now, the 6.5 Carcano, which is what the Carcano that we are talking about is chambered in, 6.5 Carcano has a lot of discrepancies whenever it comes to that particular cartridge out of this particular rifle. And a bunch of those discrepancies piled on top of one another kind of leads to the rifle having what would you call it, a negative reputation? Yeah, we're going to say negative reputation with lack of better terminology. So, one of the big issues with the 6.5 Carcano, and one of the big negative downsides about it, is that a lot of people say that it is inaccurate. Now, I can understand why people would call the Carcano inaccurate, and that's simply not the rifle's fault. That's the people in power who were utilizing the rifle and the platforms, along with modern manufactured ammunition not being made correctly. So, let's go ahead and talk about the people in power. A lot of your Carcanos, which started life out as a long rifle, were actually cut down and shortened to be the length of a carbine. This particular one has been sporterized, and it was in fact a long rifle that was cut down. Now, that being said, those long rifles used a gain twist rifling in order to properly stabilize the projectile without completely disintegrating it. It was just something that Italy was trying to do at the time. But that gain twist rifling changes rifling twist rates as the barrel progresses. Well, you cut off the end progressing, the end progressing rates of the barrel, and you suddenly have a barrel with a twist rate that will not stabilize the bullets properly. And so as a result, you get an inaccurate rifle because your bullets are not very well stabilized. So if you have a rifle with a gain twist barrel on it and you don't know it's a gain twist barrel and the barrel's been cut down, you're probably going to have a pretty inaccurate rifle simply because you don't know better. And it's not just people who sporterized guns that did it. The Italian military did it with a good portion of their carbines, and it was just a way to be able to utilize old stock to make new firearms. So if you had a gain twist rifling and it's not working well, that's not the fault of the rifle, that's just the fault of whoever had the rifle that decided to cut the barrel without really thinking about it. Now, another big issue with the accuracy of these rifles is that a lot of people, whenever they buy these things, they'll get new production ammo that has bullet designs that are like this right here. These right here are, I can't remember, I think they're 140 grain projectiles or something like that. They're not very heavy, and the Carcano series of rifle was actually designed and intended to be used with heavier projectiles. They were designed to use the earlier round nose style of bullet, and this is what Italy continued to use in their 6.5 Carcano rifles, even after Spitzer projectiles had long since been adopted. So this right here is the more appropriate style of projectile, and it just stabilizes in the rifle better than a smaller, more traditional Spitzer style of round. So it's the wrong style of projectile that most people are running through these rifles. Not only that, but new production ammunition tends to be made from a 2.64 diameter bullet. That 2.64 diameter bullet is different than the bullet that the Carcano actually takes, which is a 2.68 diameter projectile. So you have a smaller bullet, which does not stabilize because the game twist rifling has been cut, and it's the wrong weight and contour of bullet that the rifle is actually designed for. You add all of those up, and you end up getting yourself a rifle that is pretty gosh darn inaccurate. It's just the everything piled on top of one another is what leads these rifles to not be accurate. So if you have a Carcano and you're having issues with accuracy, it's like a 6 or 7 MOA gun, go out and get yourself some actual properly sized bullets, get yourself some heavier bullets, and try that out and see if that helps you with your problem. Now, another big thing that I hear all the time is that Carcanos are notorious for shooting high. Notorious, however it is that word's pronounced. But anyway, here in the United States, whenever it comes to traditionally aiming rifles, you line your front sight up with the top wings of your rear sight, and that there gives you your sight picture so you can go ahead and send lead down range. Well, the Carcano actually sights in a little bit differently. You take your front sight and you actually line it up to the very bottom of that rear sight, and that will give you a 200 yard or 200 meter zero, as opposed to the 400 meter zero that you would get if you aimed up at the very top. So it's a really good way to get a rifle that's shooting high to not shoot high anymore. I mean, of course, it is still going to shoot high, especially if you're shooting at 50 yards with a 200 yard zero, and there's not much that you can do about that, save swap out the front sight with a higher front sight if you were so inclined. As a matter of fact, this front sight right here looks like it is not off of a Carcano. This one's been sporterized. So that might be a tall front sight right there. That zeroes out for this rifle. I have not tested this rifle, but that might be something to look into. But anyway, you combine the weird sighting system with it being different than what we're used to here in the United States, with the ammunition that's not to the spec it's supposed to be, and you have people making claims that these rifles are just not that great, especially since the game twist rifling in the barrel is cut, and it's just not a good situation. These rifles were not set up for success, and as a matter of fact, they were kind of set up for failure. Now, I really like the 6.5 Carcano rifles. I like them a lot better than the 7.35, just because I like the extremely light recoiling round. Anyone who's ever fired these rifles, even if you fire it out of a carbine that is extremely lightweight and short and handy and comfortable, the recoil out of even one of these small rifles is extremely tolerable. Now, all that being said, I'm a hand loader, and I do load with 2.64 diameter projectiles, and I do have a couple of rifles that take those 2.64 diameter projectiles extremely well and have no issues whatsoever with those. So just because you have a Carcano does not necessarily mean that it's not going to run modern production 2.64 diameter projectiles very well, or not very well. Like, it's just going to depend on your particular rifle. I do have a couple, actually I got a couple of Carcanos. I got some Tourney made, some Gardone made, some Brescia made. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I've noticed that some of those manufacturers have repeated success with those smaller diameter bullets, and some of the manufacturers just have no success whatsoever. Like, I think all of my Tourney rifles do really poorly with 2.64 diameter projectiles, but all my Gardone rifles seem to be able to stabilize it extremely well. Now, all that being said, what's another thing? Well, I've heard a couple of people tell me over the years that the Carcano action is weak and fragile and frail. I do know that there are Carcanos out there that are chambered in 8mm Mauser, which is a much more powerful, much more potent cartridge than something like 6.5 Carcano. So, yeah, definitely not a bad action, because it can handle that 8mm Mauser cartridge. I've seen them fired. I fired a couple of them myself, and the rifle did not explode on me. Now, the 6.5 Carcano is a rifle that has 2 locking lugs on the front of the rifle, which is exactly what we see in the Mauser 91 and 93 pattern rifles. Now, granted, this right here is nothing even remotely similar to a Mauser 93 or 91, but we do see those 2 locking lugs And while those two front locking lugs are a really good indication of a strong action, especially one that is strong enough to handle full-powered rifle cartridges. So if you think that the Mauser action is strong, then you shouldn't have any issues admitting that the 6.5 Carcano action is strong. So is this a bad rifle? Is the Carcano series of rifles bad rifles? I'm going to go ahead and say no. Originally, they were quite good rifles. However, they were just, like I said, set up for failure by people who had no idea what they were doing, by people who did not pay attention to the twist rates in the barrels and they cut them down to make the carbines, or by the people who, you know, in the modern manufacturing markets who do not pay attention to the diameter of projectile, or they cut corners for cost-effective reasons and they just decide to not use the proper size cartridges. You combine those things with the high shooting sights because people don't know how to actually use the sights, and you get rifles that are sketchy whenever it comes to their reliability and accuracy. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and say that. Alright, I may as well point this out since I'm on it, since we're talking about the Carcano. I wasn't going to point this out because it wasn't one of the things that I was originally intending on, but let's go ahead and talk about it anyway. I hear a lot of people tell me that they don't want to use a Carcano because they don't want to have to worry about the clip that is necessary to be inserted into the rifle in order to use the rifle. I hear a lot of people tell me that they want like a Mauser style system because you don't need that secondary in-block clip in order to load your rifle. For a Mauser rifle, you can just load your rounds right into the rifle. The internal magazine of the Mauser has the feed lips built right into the magazine itself versus the Mannlicher style system, which has the feed lips built directly onto the clip. So pros and cons with each of those systems, but I hear a lot of people tell me that they don't want to have to worry about that external feeding device. Well, for those people, they probably wouldn't like anything like this. This right here is a modern firearm, and it's has an external feeding device. Guess what? Without this external feeding device that I need to feed the firearm, this right here is a single-shot rifle. Without this external feeding device that you need to feed your firearm, you have yourself a single-shot rifle. Or how about this right here? If I were to pull out this external feeding device to feed the firearm, now this right here is a single-shot handgun. So, yeah, the idea of an external feeding device to feed your firearm is obviously not a new one, but it's not an uncommon one. A lot of people are fine with needing a magazine or something to feed a firearm like this, but lo and behold, you need, in this particular case, a clip to feed a firearm like this, and suddenly it's a problem. Alright, I think I've rambled on long enough about the Carcano. I think that they're fantastic rifles. I really, really enjoy them. I really like the 6.5 Carcano cartridge. I tend to use 150 grain projectiles, and they tend to travel about 2,400 or so feet per second, so a little bit more powerful than 7.62 by 39. And I use these for hunting purposes fairly regularly here in the state of Florida. And things don't get all that big here, so that's more than enough power to be able to take one of the things out that I'm going after. So I can attest that the 6.5 Carcano cartridge is certainly not underpowered. It's just not a full-powered rifle cartridge like what we're used to. Like if I were to compare it to something like 7.62 by 54 rimmed, oh boy, it is not even close. However, it is still powerful enough to do the job. Alright, thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys in the next episode.
I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.